begin with the development as far as India is concerned. It has now cut the special additional excise duties on petrol and diesel to 3 rupees per litre and 0 respectively. That means 0 is for diesel. Now, according to this government order that has now come across, this is coming as a big relief amid the volatility that still continues as far as the Strait of Hormuz in West Asia conflict is concerned. Let's connect with Akansha on this. Akansha, the Union Minister for Petroleum, has also made a mention of these developments, that the government has been undertaking measures so that consumers may not be affected.
Absolutely. Let me take you through the statement of Petroleum Minister Hardeep Singh Puri on the measures that the government has taken. He has said, and I quote, international crude prices have gone through the roof in the last 1 month, from around $70 a barrel to around 122. Petrol and diesel prices for consumer have gone up all over the world. Prices have increased by around 30 to 50% in Southeast Asian countries, 30% in North American countries, and 20% in Europe, and 50% in African country. Now, he has said that the Modi government had two choices: either increase the prices for citizens of Bharat, as all the other nations have done, or bear the brunt on the finances so that the Indian citizens are insulated from the international volatility. Now, he has said that the Prime Minister Ji, keeping with his government's commitment of the last 4 years since the conflict in Russia-Ukraine also started, decided to take a hit on its own finances again to safeguard the Indian nation. Citizens, in fact, he has gone on to say that the government has taken a huge hit on the taxation revenues to ensure every very high losses of the oil companies, approximately 24 rupees per litre for the petrol and 30 rupees per litre for diesel, and at this time when the sky-high international prices are reduced. At the same time, export tax has been levied as international prices of the petrol and diesel have skyrocketed, and any refinery exporting to the foreign nation will have to pay export tax. Yeah. My gratitude to the Prime Minister and Nirmala Sitharaman for this timely, bold and visionary decision. So going on to say that the government had two choices: either to increase the petrol and diesel prices or insulate the people of the country from the crises that are going on in the country. As far as the Modi government is concerned, they have protected the citizens. Hardeep Singh Puri calling this a very timely, bold and visionary decision. Amit.
All right, Akansha, thank you for that. Pragya, good morning. That means that it will reduce pressure on OMCs, especially when it comes to raising petrol and diesel prices amid the crude oil rates that seems to be rising on the back of the Iran-US war, because this action arrives amid worsening global energy crisis that has been sparked by this ongoing conflict between US and Israel versus Iran, along with Tehran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which is a vital route that transports about a fifth of the world's crude oil and gas supply. So, Pragya, reducing pressure on the OMCs, especially when it comes to raising petrol and diesel prices?
Absolutely, and it was a very important step that the government has taken. In fact, all the OMCs have been speaking to the government about this, and government also recognized that if the prices on the retail, the petrol pumps have not increased, that it does not mean that they can bear the brunt for a very long time. And this is why this timely decision has come from the government, because government also knows that the international pricing of per barrel has also increased to $122 at a time. And this is exactly the time when these companies said we need some sort of relief, not all. So this is why the government has decided to reduce excise duty to 3 rupees on petrol and 0 to diesel. But also, having said that, government has also taken a big decision of levying the export duty, at least on the refinery exporting to foreign nations. Then they will have to pay the export tax. Considering that we are also bearing the brunt of the international skyrocketed prices on petrol and diesel,
so let me take that question to Mr. Sharad Kohli. Mr. Kohli, good morning. Do you believe that the centre has said, it will take the revenues to be a hit for them, but as far as shielding the citizens is concerned, in the long run, the government continues to take such measures?
Yeah, good morning, Amita, to you and Times Now viewers. Indeed, it's a very smart move, because the oil marketing companies, Indian Oil, Bharat Petroleum, Hindustan Petroleum, were on the brink of, passing this on to the consumers. It could be happening any time, because they had collected about 25,000 crores of reserves. That's what is said, when the crude oil prices were hovering between 60 and 70. And people were wondering that these profits are being accumulated. So they use these profits to absorb the higher crude oil prices ever since the war started. And now those reserves were getting eroded. So it was just a matter of time before they had to pass on. And I'm sure the calculators must have been on. And the government took a hit that, okay, we'll reverse the excise. You don't pass it on. Your cost will go down by way of reduced excise or nil excise. And the increased cost can be absorbed. So this is kind of a cushion which has been provided to the oil marketing companies, so they don't pass it on. And I can tell you that the petrol and diesel prices at the petrol stations for consumers will not see any major change. There could be minor mathematical changes here and there, although I'm sure the adjustments have been done accordingly, and there may not be any change also. But that's a very smart move, keeping in mind that there are elections in 4 states next month. It would have been a very unpopulous move because inflation is already on the rise.
Well, that seems to be the opinion of the opposition mainly. But remains to be seen, for how long, because we're still looking at signs, positive signs, as far as dialogue and diplomacy seems to be at play at the West Asian conflict. Mr. Kohli, appreciate you joining us here on the broadcast. Let's reconnect with Srinjoy on this. Srinjoy, the government is of the opinion that they are ready to absorb the oil shocks and cutting the fuel burden so that it doesn't affect the consumers at large.
Yes. Oil prices for Brent crude prices were $70 a barrel on the 28th of February. Today, it is roughly $110 plus. That's a huge increase of about $40. So someone had to absorb it. Someone had to shield the person who is going to the gas station from paying additional amounts. And the government clearly has done it this time. The government, by reducing the duties, clearly has worked this out, that if they reduce duties by this much, then the cost to the consumer will not be particularly large. We still don't know what the final amount that people will have to pay per liter of petrol or diesel, but you would argue, you would imagine that it will be not very different from what it is today.
But as far as the relief measures are also concerned in the long run, this is something that the Prime Minister said in Parliament on both of the occasions while he addressed the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha as well. But that time the circumstances had changed, Srinjoy, within 24 hours. While he spoke in the Lok Sabha, President Trump had already announced that there would be a 5-day relief as far as Iranian energy infrastructure is concerned. So as far as signs of a possible thaw seems to have now been extended also by the President of the United States as far as talks and diplomacy is concerned.
See, when the war started, it was about $70 a barrel. Then it went up to 120. Then when President Trump said about 10, 12 days ago that the war is ending, it came down to 90. Then the people realized the war wasn't ending. So it went back to 110. So there has been an oscillation, there has been movement, primarily depending on what the President of the United States has said. But now it was at 110, and therefore you would expect some impact on everybody. So that is really where the problem is. As long as the war goes on, and let's not forget, there are 2 big wars going on in the world today. The Ukrainians are fighting the Russians for the last 4 years. That's one thing. And because of that, till very recently, there were sanctions on Russian oil, which creates another problem for oil importers. Then you have this war for the last 28 days. And this means the Straits of Hormuz, all oil-producing and gas-producing countries are facing this problem, whether it's Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, Saudi Arabia, all of them are under pressure, not to speak of Iran itself. So naturally, you will expect oil prices to go up. It's just demand and supply. If 20% of the oil is...
Srinjoy, because that means that this measure would also reduce pressure on them, because ultimately they wouldn't have a choice but to raise the, petrol and diesel prices amid the rising crude oil rates. That seems to be also on the brink of another rise that is being witnessed. So they, in a way has put off the pressure on the consumer as well, because there is no that kind of pressure that is building on the oil companies too.
Yes, these are issues that would have been worked out. But the whole point is crude oil prices, Brent crude has gone up from 70 to 110. Now that's a huge jump in a month. Now keeping in mind the fact that there are other problems, the war between Ukraine and Russia and so on, and the fact that in India and the world has not arrived to a sort of 100% green economy, oil remains as important as it is. So therefore, some intervention was necessary.
Well, that intervention has now come in from the government's point of view, because they have been saying that this is coming across as a big relief, especially for the consumers, amid this action that has taken place during the worsening global energy crisis that has been sparked with the ongoing tensions. All right, you're watching Times Now. We're going to head into a very short break.